Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the announcement by the Crown Prosecution Service this morning that they're going to prosecute 6 people in relation to Hillsborough. This prosecution, the inquiry and this development only happened because of the incredible work done by the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham and other colleagues around this House. And I think we should pay tribute to all of those that spent a great deal of time trying to ensure there was justice for those that died at Hillsborough. Mr. Speaker, 79 people died in Grenfell Tower. Our thoughts are with the families and friends of those that have died, those still unaccounted for, and those who are going to live with the trauma of this horrific and utterly avoidable tragedy for the rest of their lives. Last Thursday, the Prime Minister said she expected to appoint a judge to chair the inquiry within the next few days. We haven't had any further news on this. Can she now update the House when an appointment will be made and what will be the timetable for the inquiry?
Well, may I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman, I think we are all welcome the fact that after so many years of waiting, the Hillsborough families and there were different groups within Hillsborough, not just the Hillsborough Justice Campaign. There were the Hillsborough families who came together, and the work that was done by Margaret Aspinall and others has been absolutely exemplary. And I'm sure, as I said, obviously today will be a day of really mixed emotions for them. But I welcome the fact that charging decisions have been taken. I think that is an important step forward. The right honourable gentleman asked me to update in relation to Grenfell Tower, and Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to update the House on a number of aspects. We all know what an unimaginable tragedy this was, and our thoughts will continue to be with all those who've been affected by it. As of this morning, the cladding from 120 tower blocks across the country in 37 local authority areas had been tested and had failed the combustibility test. Given the 100% failure rate, we are very clear with local authorities and housing associations. They should not wait for test results. They should get on with the job of the fire safety checks, and indeed they are doing that. And they should take any action necessary, and the government will support them in doing that. The Secretary of State, the Community Secretary, has set up an independent expert advisory panel to advise on the measures that need to be taken, which is meeting this week. On the housing offer, 282 good quality temporary properties have been identified, 132 families have had their needs assessed, and 65 offers of temporary accommodation have already been made to families. The payment from the fund that we've been made available, the discretionary fund, those payments continue. As of this morning, nearly £1.25 million of payments have been paid. And additionally, we're giving an extra £1 million to the local consortia of charities, trusts and foundations which have been doing such important work. On the issue of the public inquiry, I do expect this to be able to name a judge soon. As the right honourable gentleman will know, the process is that the Lord Chief Justice recommends the name of a judge. What we want to do is to ensure that as the process is going forward for that inquiry, that the survivors, the families concerned, do have involvement with that, and it's that work that we're currently doing.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, but I hope that she's able to stick to her promise of everyone being rehoused within 3 weeks, because at the moment it doesn't look anything like that target's going to be achieved. She, I hope, understands the fear that so many people have living in tower blocks at the present time all around the country. In 2014, the All-Party Fire and Safety Group wrote to the DCLG warning, and I quote, "Today's buildings have a much higher content of readily available combustible material. There have been contradictory messages from the government. Can the Prime Minister give a categorical answer? Is cladding with a combustible core, such as polyethylene, legal for use on high-rise buildings, and was the cladding of Grenfell Tower legal?"
Thank you. The situation is, in relation to the cladding, that the building regulations identify the cladding which is compatible with the building regulations and that which is compliant with those building regulations. My understanding is that this particular cladding was not compliant with the building regulations. This raises wider issues, as the House will recognise, and it is important that we are careful in how we talk about this, because there is a criminal investigation taking place, and it's important that we allow the police to do that criminal investigation and take the decisions that they need to take. But there is a much wider issue here, as we have seen from the number of buildings where the cladding has failed the combustibility test, from those samples that have been sent in already from local authorities and housing associations. This is a much wider issue. It's an issue that has been continuing for many years, for decades, in terms of cladding being put up in buildings. There are real questions as to how this has happened, why it's happened, and how we can ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. That is why I'm clear that, in addition to the inquiry that needs to identify the specific issues for Grenfell Tower, what happened in relation to Grenfell Tower and who was responsible, we will also need to look much more widely at why it is that over decades, under different governments, under different councils, material has been put up on these tower blocks that is non-compliant with the building regulations. There's a very wide issue here. We need to make sure we get to the bottom of it, and that's what we're going to do.
Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Speaker, last Thursday the Prime Minister told my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, that she would make the results of the Grenfell Tower cladding testing public within 48 hours, and I'm not sure if she's actually done that with a statement today. Yes, as of yesterday, and the Prime Minister just confirmed this, 120 high-rise blocks across Britain have had fire safety tests and failed them. What timetable has the Prime Minister set for such tests to be completed, including on schools and hospitals in every part of the country? And what plans does she have to compel the testing of high-rise buildings such as private sector office blocks and hotels, which may also have compostable cladding material on them?
If I can just say to the right honourable gentleman, what I said last week in the statement was that my understanding was that the police were going to make a statement about the issue of the cladding material within 48 hours, and I think the police then did make a statement about the position. In relation to the test, my message is a very simple one. As I said in my answer to his first question, what we're saying to people is this is not a question of waiting for the tests. Don't wait until you've got a sample in and you know what the result of the test is. So far, 100% of the samples that have come in have proved to be combustible. So work on the assumption that you should be doing the fire safety checks now. That's what we're telling people to do. We know that parts of the private sector are also doing their work in terms of fire safety checks. But my response to all those who have buildings that are covered by this is do the fire safety checks with the fire service, take any measures that are necessary to ensure fire safety, and the government will support you in doing that.
Since 2010, only a third of new schools have had sprinkler systems installed, so parents are rightly concerned about the safety for their children. In 2013, the Lacknell House coroner's letter formally recommended the government should encourage providers of housing in high-rise residential buildings to consider retrofitting sprinklers. 2 years later, Inside Housing reported that only 1% of council tower blocks had sprinklers fitting. Can the Prime Minister let us know what the government actually did to encourage the retrofitting during the last 4 years?
The government did indeed ensure that those local authorities were aware of the recommendation that had come from the coroner. They did act on that recommendation from the coroner. But I say to the right honourable gentleman, if we look at what has happened and the identification of the issues in a number of tower blocks so far, there are various issues that lead to concern about fire safety. It is, if we look at what has happened in Camden, for example, where one of the 5 blocks was considered to be habitable, but 4 of the 5 blocks were not considered to be habitable, that was not just because of the cladding, it was because of other issues in relation, for example, to the gas riser. all of these issues raise wider questions. They raise wider questions about the inspections that have taken place. They raise wider questions about residents' complaints. Residents' voices not being heard. That's an issue that has been raised at Grenfell Tower. It's also an issue that has been raised in Camden. This is a much wider question. A terrible tragedy took place. People lost their lives who should never have lost their lives. We need to look at what has happened over decades in this country that has led to this position, and that's exactly what we will do.
Mr. Speaker, there have been 2 coroner's reports. Building regulations have not been overhauled, and local authorities, whilst asked to act upon them, have had their budgets cut by 40% during that same period. Under her predecessor, fire safety audits and inspections were cut by a quarter. Fire authority budgets were cut by a quarter. Can the Prime Minister give an assurance to the House that the further 20% cuts to the fire service planned by 2020 will now be halted?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that in his reference to the building regulations, I think he's somewhat missed part of the point in this, which is that it's not just a question of what laws you have, it's how those are being applied. And that is the issue. We have the building regulations about compliant materials. The question is, why is it that despite that, we have seen in local authority area after local authority area materials being put up that appear not to comply with those building regulations? And he talks about, and that is what we need to get to the bottom of. Why is it that fire inspections, that local authority inspections appear to have missed this essential issue?
I think I can help the Prime Minister with this issue. When you cut local authority expenditure by 40%, you end up with fewer building control inspectors.
Order! It's pretty bad when people shout. For somebody to be sitting right by the Speaker's chair and shouting displays, let's say, a lack of wisdom, which should not be repeated. Order! Every member in this chamber must and will be heard however long the session has to run. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I was simply making the point, which seems to have upset a lot of members opposite, that when you cut local authority budgets by 40%, we all pay a price in public safety. Fewer inspectors, fewer building control inspectors, fewer planning inspectors, we all pay a price. And, Mr. Speaker, those cuts to the fire service have meant there are 11,000 fewer firefighters. The public sector pay cap is hitting recruitment and retention right across the public sector. What the tragedy of Grenfell Tower has exposed is the disastrous effects of austerity. Mr. Speaker, this disregard for working class communities, the terrible consequences of deregulation and cutting corners, I urge the Prime Minister to come up with the resources needed to test and remove cladding, retrofit sprinklers, properly fund the fire service and the police so that all our communities can truly feel safe in their own homes. Mr. Speaker, this disaster must be a wake-up call.
The cladding of tower blocks did not start under this government. It did not start under the previous coalition government. The cladding of tower blocks began under the Blair government. The right honourable gentleman talks about local authority resources and talks about changes to the regulation. In 2005, it was a Labour government that introduced the regulatory reform Fire Safety Order, which changed the requirement to inspect a building on fire safety from the local fire authority, which was usually the fire brigade, to a responsible person. The legislation governing fire safety in tower blocks and this was commented on by the Lakenhall House report into that fire. It criticised that 2005 order, which had been put in place by the Labour government.
The Prime Minister's answer must be heard, and it will be. Prime Minister.
And laws which took effect in 2006 ended the practice of routine fire service inspections, passing the responsibility to councils. That is why I say to the right honourable gentleman, this should be an issue that across this House we recognise is a matter that has been developing over decades, is a matter that has occurred under governments of both colours, under councils of all political persuasions, and is something which I would hope we would say we should come together and ensure that we get to the answers of why this has happened over many years, what has gone wrong, and how do we stop it from happening in the future.